So anyway, good morning everybody.
Good morning.
As you probably all know, I'm David Clarke, who's the boss of DVC, and Richard Payne here is from Holden. Holden is distributor of EDIUS, Panasonic cameras, Teradek cubes, quite a lot of the stuff that we're actually going to be showing off, so he's going to be taking over for talking about some of those. So obviously we're talking quite a bit about editing, other stuff is different hardware, real-time titling, that sort of thing. So yeah, he'll be doing some of the open date, I'll be doing some of this as well. I'm going to start off talking about EDIUS, which is has been our favourite editing program for ages. So let's just get straight on with that. Would you like to just turn the lights off? You can probably see a bit better then. So basically this is EDIUS 7, which is the latest version. It came out a couple of months ago. The biggest change between this one and the previous one is that EDIUS 7 is 64-bit, whereas the previous one, EDIUS 6.5, was 32-bit. Now what that basically means is it can access memory better and it can access multi-core processors better. Now actually EDIUS 6.5 worked really well. I found I could throw tons of footage on it, heavily compressed stuff like AVC HD, MP4 files, and it would just carry on going. Now when Adobe changed from 32-bit to 64-bit, we really needed it because Premiere would keel over if it was having too much compressed footage in it. Whereas EDIUS actually worked really well. So actually in terms of performance it's got a little bit better, but it already worked really well, so I'm not noticing for stuff like my AVC HD footage, I'm not noticing a huge difference because it already worked really well. What it is better for is 4K footage, and bigger than HD footage. Now some of the stuff I'm filming, which is on the Blackmagic camera, is actually bigger than HD, and it definitely works better with that. I was hoping to get some nice 4K clips to show you, but I don't actually have a 4K screen anyway, so and I haven't got any that I can show you, but basically it is better at dealing with 4K. Is anybody filming 4K? Yeah.
I shot on red.
Yeah. I mean, basically 4K is the next step up from high definition. So high definition you're looking at 1920 by 1080 pixels. With 4K you're going up to 3800 by, I've forgotten the other one, but yeah, 3800-ish wide pixels. Or just to be difficult, there's two different settings for 4K. There's one that's about 3800 and one that's 4000 and something. So yeah, just to be difficult, they've gone and invented two different standards of it. I went to the IBC show in Amsterdam, which I go to every year, and that's what the big thing was everywhere. Everybody was shouting about was 4K footage. Very little about 3D footage, stereoscopic editing. Anybody doing stereoscopic filming in 3D?
No, it's so passé, so last year.
I actually film in 3D, I quite like 3D, but it's not something that took off. And so the last big show, everything was about 4K and 8K, which is the next step beyond that. Apart from some guys from the BBC who were there showing high definition at 100 frames a second, just to be different. Which actually looked quite nice, but that's another story. So basically, like I say, 4K is the next thing that that everybody's talking about moving to, and then 8K beyond that. I was thinking about getting a 4K TV for the open day, but the cheapest one I found was about £3 grand. So I decided not to just yet, since I haven't yet got a 4K camera. But the whole point is it's a much better picture. And what the EDIUS does is, because it's gone 64-bit, it deals with that sort of stuff better. It also deals with things like red footage better, so you're talking about using a red camera. Yeah. Basically, if you try to use that on EDIUS 6.5, there's a setting up in the settings up here, where you go to importer, exporter and red footage, and there's a setting there for the quality it's going to preview it at. Now a regular computer is not going to manage one-to-one, but I was just about on this computer, which is a standard, what we call Haswell single processor computer. I was about getting half quality playback on some red footage on this. Probably have to drop it for quarter for some of it, it depends on the size, but half or quarter, whereas on EDIUS 6.5 it had to be an 1/8 or a 16th. Now what that does is it drops the quality of the footage, so you don't see the full quality of the footage, but at least it can play it back. And as I say, the big thing was with the change from 6.5 to 7 is you can get much better playback of 4K footage. Now it will have a knock-on effect for your regular projects, because when you load up a big project inside of EDIUS, obviously it has to load up all the clips and then it's dealing with all that in memory, and the fact is it'll actually be better at dealing with that. It is a bit faster at rendering, so if we actually are knocking up different file formats, we've noticed it is a bit faster, possibly about 20% faster. Didn't really get any proper figures, but we were estimating about 20%. Depends on the format.
And change the quality of the rendering?
The quality of the rendering is the same. with the exception of something to do with the filters I'll talk about. But basically, yeah, I mean, it's the same programming. The other thing is when you go from a 32-bit program to a 64-bit program, you've basically got to rewrite it. And you know, when they did that with Final Cut Pro, it went from Final Cut Pro 7 to something completely different in Final Cut Pro X, and they completely rewrote it. This is exactly the same as EDIUS 6.5. Everything's in the same place, all the settings are the same place, the keyboard shortcuts are the same, so you don't need to buy another keyboard or anything. There's nothing really different at all about it apart from a couple of extra bits. The one thing that is gone is the 2D picture and the 3D picture in picture aren't used anymore. They're not there anymore. But apart from that, you'll find it's the same program. You don't have to relearn anything. You just install it and start using it just as you used to use the old one.
And what about compatibility of plugins and things like VizTitle and all the other?
So yeah, when you go 64-bit, 64-bit programs can only understand 64-bit stuff. So you can understand 64-bit plugins, not 32-bit plugins, and you can understand 64-bit footage. On the footage side, it's not really a problem because everything's got a 64-bit codec these days, so that's not much of a problem. It is with plugins. You need new versions of all your plugins. So you need a new version of VizTitle, although if you've got VizTitle 2 it's free. If you've got VizTitle 1 it's not free, you have to pay to upgrade your VizTitle, which is about 70 quid. We can do all that for you here. But yeah, as long as you've got VizTitle 2, then the update to get 2.5, which is the one you need for this, is free. Anything else, the ProDev plugins, so if you had Macali and you had Vitascene, the ones that used to come with EDIUS 6, they'll have to be updated and you'll have to pay for an update. But if you've actually bought Vitascene 2 or you've bought Macali 2, then you get a free update from ProDad for that. The new blue ones, I'm pretty sure if you've bought recent ones, you get free updates for those as well. Now, when it comes down to things like the ProDad plugins, you know, I mean, a lot of people were using Macali in EDIUS 6 because it's a really good image stabilizer. This has got an image stabilizer in it, which I'm quite happy with, and I don't use Macali anymore at all, so I didn't bother to update it. There's nothing in the new program which is the equivalent of Vitascene, which is a bunch of glowy and sparkly effects. So if you want that, you have to buy it. Now the update from ProDad, if you've got EDIUS 6 and you had the freebies, the update's about 60 or 70 quid. You get it directly from ProDad. We've actually got a link on our site so you can get it. But yeah, any plugins you've actually bought for it, you have to buy new ones. Some of them, if you bought recently, they'll just be free updates. So, you know, VizTitle in particular is one I use a lot. I also use Boris Red, which is a full-blown compositing program, and I use that inside of EDIUS. And there's a free update for that as long as you've got Red 5, which has been out for a year or two. Then that's a free update as well.
What about compatibility with existing projects?
So yeah, if you're loading up a project from EDIUS 6 or EDIUS 6.5, it'll load the project up. But if you load up like an EDIUS 6 project that's got Vitascene on the timeline, it loads up and there's a dummy filter on it, because if you don't have Vitascene anymore. If you buy the update, then it'll carry on working. It's just like everything else. If you load up an old EDIUS project in the new EDIUS, you can't go back. So you can go from 6 to 7, but you can't go back from 7 to 6, which is pretty much the same as everybody else.
Has there been any improvement in the stabilizer of the EDIUS stabilizer?
Well, the EDIUS, I was going to show you that in a second, because if you haven't been using EDIUS 6.5, you wouldn't be aware of the stabilizer. So I was going to show you that in a second, but no, it's the same. Effectively, just think about 7 as the same as 6.5. So it does everything the same. There's a new filter in it, which they call the Gaussian blur. So we've got a keyframeable blur, which is nice. But apart from that, everything else is pretty much the same. So if you're on EDIUS 6.5, there's nothing that came with EDIUS 6.5, there's no plugins came with EDIUS 6.5, so it'll be the same as 7. It's if you're moving from EDIUS 6 or EDIUS 5, that's when you're going to have some of the plugins you used to get with it won't work in the new one. Title Motion Pro is another one. If you're using a really old version of EDIUS, doesn't work anymore with anything. So you have to buy something else. Now, to me, the logical thing to buy, the sensible thing to buy is VizTitle, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But apart from that, so for people who've never seen EDIUS before, obviously I've started the program and I've come straight in and loaded up a project. The first thing you'll see when you open up is a project which just lets you start a project. You'll choose, actually, for people who haven't seen it before, let's just do that. That's the latest one, we're on 7.2. If anybody's using EDIUS 7, which apparently Richard is on his system there, they ought to update it. Because, like everything, there were a few little bugs to start off with, and they're mostly solved in that. So this is the first thing you'll see when you actually open up EDIUS. You have a bunch of things at the top which are user profiles, so you can set up different settings for different people. All it does is change the look of the windows, it changes the buttons and that sort of thing. So if there's two of you using the same computer, then you can just have two different settings and you can swap between them whenever you feel like. It also means that you can take your settings from this machine and pop it onto another one very easily. So we have a user profile that we've set up that we actually put on all our computers and we send out with any upgrades that you buy, and we suggest you use that rather than the Grass Valley one because there's a couple of things that we changed that we prefer. But that's all the user profiles are. You can completely ignore them or you can have your own settings. Mainly what you do is you start off a new project or you open up an existing project. So if I start off a new project, now normally you'll see you've got a bunch of different settings, which are the standard ones. You can make up as many as you like. On our systems we generally have a couple of standard definition settings and a couple of high definition settings. But if you choose any of this lot, you can always customize it, and then in there you can see all the possible settings that you've actually got. So you've got lots of different possible sizes that you can put in there. It goes all the way up to 4K. I mentioned there are two versions of 4K. There's one which is 4096 and there's one that's 3840. There's two different 4K standards. And the 3 grand televisions I was looking at do that one rather than the other one. But yeah, you can do that or you can make your own up. So if you come in here you can make up a custom size and change it. Now with EDIUS, basically you choose a project setting and then you go into the project and the entire project is that setting all the way through. So if you have other programs like Premiere, you can go into a project and have different timeline settings for different timelines. EDIUS is the same setting for everything, but you can change it. So if you're in a high def project, you can swap it into a standard def project and that sort of thing. Apart from that, you can see there's lots of other stuff in here. It's all the usual stuff, it does progressive and upper and lower field and all that kind of thing. One big thing which is a change for EDIUS is it deals with alpha channels properly. In previous versions it wasn't very good at dealing with alpha channels, now it deals with alpha channels properly. It also deals a lot better with 10-bit colour as opposed to 8-bit colour. And again, that will make probably a bit more sense when we talk about effects, but is everybody familiar with 8-bit colour and 10-bit colour?
Not really.
Most, things like AVC HD, XDCAM, DVC Pro, they're all generally filming in 8-bit colour. If you go to 10-bit colour, you have more bits for the colour. So you have more channels for colour, which means you get better colour. So you can do things, if you're filming in 8-bit and you start to brighten it up and do some effects on it, you can sometimes end up with this sort of steppy gradient across something because there's not enough colour in there to have a nice smooth gradient. So working in 10-bit colour is better. Now you might film it in 8-bit, but then edit in 10-bit because then when you start tarting it up and doing stuff with it, you'll get better results out of it. EDIUS 6 didn't deal with 10-bit colour properly at all. 6.5, bit better. 7 is better still because all the filters are also 10-bit. So it deals with 10-bit colour a lot better. Again, this will probably make more sense when we start to talk about Blackmagic cameras and DaVinci Resolve, because there's a lot of stuff to do with colour there. The more bits you have on the colour, the better your results are going to be. Your results are probably going to be 8-bit because you'll probably make a DVD or a Blu-ray or stick it up on YouTube and they'll all be 8-bit. But if you're dealing with more colour in the first place, you can get better looking results. The big thing that was added into EDIUS recently was stereoscopic editing, which nobody here cares about. But it actually does do, I think, the best stereoscopic editing out of all the editing programs. And I've got a 3D camera, so I do use it. So, and James Cameron was going on about how good it was and that sort of thing. It does do very good stereoscopic.
The film Gravity, which is on at the moment, has got everybody talking about 3D again, because apparently the 3D is so fantastic in it that people have said, oh, we'd forgotten it can be this good, perhaps we ought to look at it again. So maybe it will bounce back.
Doctor Who's on 3D on Saturday.
That's right, yeah.
Everybody...
So when your settings you've set up on 7, if you installed it, would that have you set to 10-bit or 8-bit?
Our standard settings are generally 8-bit.
So you can go into them?
Yeah, you can change them afterwards. There's pretty much any of this you can change afterwards. There are a couple of things, like if you start a 50p project, you can't change it to 50i, but mostly you can change everything afterwards, and I do fiddle around quite frequently. And there are some things like, I'm using a piece of hardware to pump a picture up to the TV, so I've got the wonderful Panasonic broadcasting monitor here and my 50-inch TV are both being fed by this Blackmagic gizmo down here. Now that can quite happily do 10-bit output and it can do 8-bit output, but if you've got an old Grass Valley card like a Spark, it only does 8-bit projects. So, but I'll talk about the hardware in a second, because that's one of the big advantages of 7, is that the options for hardware have got cheaper. Lots of other stuff in here. The other big thing that's been added in, and this was in 6.5, is better quality scaling. So I was going to show you that in a second as well, but basically it does better quality scaling. When you're making a picture bigger or smaller or going high def to standard def, it does a better job than it used to, and in my opinion does the best job of any of the editing programs. And I've got an old standard def project that I'm trying to finish off, and it's all filmed on old standard def stuff, and I'm trying to actually put it out at 720p. But I find out if I choose some of the Lanczos settings there, I actually get a nice sharp result and better than anything else. So it's good for upscaling, it's good for downscaling. And you can see there's whole different things. In the old days it used to do that thing called average area, which was pretty good. EDIUS 6 was always a bit fuzzy. Around about 6.5 I think it was, it got a bit better. But it's sorry, about 6.05 it got a bit better. But when you went to 6.5, that's when they added in the Lanczos scaling, which was a lot better. And in the old days we used to have a lot of people saying, oh well, I'll take my video out of this and I'll bung it into a virtual dub and I'll faff around with that and then I'll bring it in and fiddle with the fill rules and blah blah to get the best quality scaling. And I don't bother now, I just set the settings up in EDIUS. And I say I do think it does a better job than anything else. I think it does a better job than Premiere. Premiere and Avid in particular is not very good. I think at this kind of quality scaling. The only other thing I think which is incomparable is actually Resolve, which is very good. But all the rest, EDIUS beats it, in my opinion. Lots of other stuff there, but basically you can come in here and you can fiddle with the settings and then you click on OK and it starts up a project. Now I'm going to go back and I'm just going to load up the one I already loaded footage on because it makes life easier. So then you get into this, which is standard interface, pretty much like every other editing program. So I've got a player and a recorder, and I can just pop between them just by clicking on those buttons. I can come up and shove it into a dual mode, so you can look at clips beforehand and afterwards, just like you would in most editing programs. You can resize all the windows, just like you can in all programs apart from Liquid. You're still Liquid better.
Thank you, David.
But you can make them as big or as small as you like. You can save layouts, you can reorganize them. You can save as many layouts as you like, and I use several. When I'm on a single screen like this, and I do prefer to work on 2 screens, or actually at home I've got 3 screens. I have 3 screens and a TV, and it's quite nice to spread it out with 3 screens. But when I'm on a single screen, I like to just have it so that they're tabbed together like this, so that I can just pop between them rather than get a bigger playback window. Apart from that, you've got over a project window here, which is again like pretty much every project window. You can put bins in it, you can organise footage. You've actually got extra metadata that you can get onto clips, which frankly I've hidden because I don't look at it very often, but there's a little metadata window down there. There's a nice search feature, so I can do things like, well, let's search for all the clip type, all the timeline sequences, because like all programs, you can make up lots and lots and lots of different timelines, and I'm forever making up new timelines and spreading my edit out of a bunch of timelines, and then I forget where I've shoved them. They're in bins all over the place. So basically I've set up a search thing there. It could be on anything, so there was a whole list of things there, so there was names and properties of clips. You can search for anything and then it'll bring that up, and then I can then, all those sequences I'll take and put in a folder called sequence. So there's a nice lot of stuff to help you organise clips in the timeline. Down here you've also got a list of effects, a marker window, source browser I'll come back to in a second, and then this thing which is the information window, and then a timeline. Now the timeline's pretty much like every program, apart from you have these different tracks which have got video and audio together, but I'll again talk about that in a second. So the first thing is actually bringing footage in. If you are using Firewire based cameras, you can still capture stuff in the old fashioned way. All you do is you pop up here and then you select your DV device, which I've got in here, and then you start capturing. It does the same as everything else. It will split stuff up based on the date and time and all that sort of thing. So capturing from DV or HDV is really easy. It's also quite easy to go back to tape afterwards. I don't know how many people are still doing that. I think it's probably not a sensible way of archiving anymore, is to go back to DV tape, because those DV tapes will only be usable as long as you have a DV tape player. But I do still have people doing it, and I get problems with lots of different programs these days going back to tape, whereas EDIUS still works. But mainly, if you're using card-based footage, you'll probably bring it in through here. So this is a thing called the source browser. You'll find that most editing programs have got this kind of thing in these days. Whenever you look at a piece of card-based footage, it's like a piece of AVC HD, you'll find that you've got a folder, under that there's another folder, then there's another folder, and then there's a folder where you've actually got the video clips. And then there'll be lots of other rubbish in there at all. As you can see, these things are actually stuff that Premiere has created when I've opened them up in Premiere. Now, the thing is, that's you actually ought to do is just trim it down, just show yourself the clips and bring the stuff in. With EDIUS, you use the source browser to do that. Another thing is all card-based cameras will actually split stuff up into 4 GB chunks. And in all those different folders there will be stuff in different folders. So for example, XD Cam saves the audio in a different place to the video, and it saves it all out. I mean, it's just a complete mess. You know, why they didn't actually say, here's a file, that's it, I don't know. But they decided to have lots of different things in there. So you need some way of bringing that in, and all the programs have got that these days. With EDIUS you use the source browser. So if, for example, I'm bringing in some P2 footage, if I plugged that camera in a Richards, it would pop up immediately. As I haven't got that camera plumbed in, what I'm going to do is get some stuff I've already copied onto the computer.
If you bring anything in, David, that's over 4K, like we record shows which are going an hour and a half in length each half, then is there any way of stitching them together with this? Because we have to use a Sony stitcher to do it.
That's what this does.
That does it, does it?
This just does it, yeah.
Right.
So if you, the whole point of using this, and it will be the same if you're using Premiere, the whole point of the browser is to take a clip that's been split into 4 gig chunks and then merge it all together into one lump.
Without dropping any frames?
Yeah. Because if you take, like, AVC HD, if you take the different clips and throw them on the timeline, there'll be a glitch at the join. The sound will drop out, probably all the picture. But yeah, with this thing it stitches it all together. I mean, another way of bringing stuff into EDIUS is you just go and find the footage that you want to bring in, and you just drag it and bung it in the bin.
What's the new XD Cam update on the 7? It says better capture for XD Cam footage.
There's some higher definition XD Cam that it's supposed to be supporting, some 4K stuff, which I'm not sure whether that's actually working 100% yet. But in terms of regular XD Cam, no. I mean, I still bring that in with the source browser, so I'll just, you know, come in here and if it's XD Cam EX, open up the folder.
So when you bring your XD Cam in, do you do it from the clip browser, Sony clip browser?
I don't use the Sony clip browser.
No, so how do you bring yours in?
I use this. Basically, if I plug the camera in, it will just pop up here, and I mean that's not actually XD Cam footage. You know, it'll just pop up here like this. You'll see the clips. I'll choose the ones that I want, and I'll either add it to the bin, in which case it just puts it in the bin and leaves it on the card, or if you add and transfer to bin, it actually shoves it into the bin. You can start editing with it, but then while you're editing, it's actually copying it across in the background. So you see these little things have got an H on there, and you can see the percentages going through. There's something down here telling you that's what's coming across, or you can go up to the background jobs, you can see all the stuff that's actually coming across there as well. But it will let it do it in the background for you as well. All the other programs, like if I'm using Premiere and I use their media browser, it doesn't copy the footage across for you. So it would actually stay on the card. As soon as you take the card out, then you'd have a great big hole in the timeline. Now Premiere does have another program which is called Prelude, which does the copying for you, but it doesn't do it inside of Premiere. So again, I just think it's a quick and easy way of doing stuff. I have to say, when this is plumbed in, you know, at the moment I'm copying stuff from one place on the hard drive to another place on the hard drive. It depends on what I'm plugging in as to how fast it is at copying. And I've got one of my cameras, the one that's filming up there, has got a 250 gigabyte hard drive in it. So when that's full, and we're talking about, you know, 60 hours worth of stuff, I plug that into here. It takes a bit of time before it pops up in the source browser, and if I'm copying the lot across, I let it do it, I don't do it in the background. And that's because I have to plug that in by USB 2, and USB 2 is slow. If I was to use a card in that and plug it into the USB 3 card readers we've got in the computer, it's a lot faster and more usable. So there are some cameras, if it's USB 2, the USB 2 slows it down a bit. But yeah, basically it should do that in the background. And yeah, if I was to use that clip, and it's finished doing it now, but if I was to actually use that clip on the timeline, while I'm editing, it will be using the one on the card until the moment it's copied onto the computer, and then it swaps it over automatically. You don't have to think at all, basically. Which I think is nice, especially if you're doing, you know, a fast edit and a same day edit. You know, you can get that stuff going and get it on edit straight away. But yeah, bringing in stuff here through the source browser I find very easy, very simple. Say if you just plug in an external camera like that, it will just automatically pop up. You don't even have to go and find it. In this case, I've copied the stuff across. One nice thing that they've added in, if you are somebody that's been using EDIUS 6 and been doing this sort of thing, is that it used to just go in the project folder and used to end up with incomprehensible names in EDIUS 6. In 7, and it's the same as 6.5, you can tell it where you want it to go and choose a folder, and it'll also make sensible names out of it. So if I'm bringing in AVC HD, it makes up a mini AVC HD card, which I can quite happily load up into anything else. In fact, I use it to back up the stuff on my camera. You know, that one's got a 250 gig hard drive. The 3D camera has got a 64 gig hard drive. One of the things I do with my footage is back it up onto a Blu-ray disc as a bunch of files. Well, I mean, I can't, you know, I've got to have some way of taking my 64 gig and making a 25 gig lump of files out of it. And I actually use this to do it, because it's dead easy, and you come in here and I just do one folder per day now, bang, 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 and then I can back that up. So it's very good at that sort of thing, and it makes something that anything else can load up, Premiere or Avid or anything else, because it makes up a mini AVC HD thing. So that's, again, that's a nice thing they've added into it. There's quite a few nice little things that they put in as well. There are things like, you know, when you're looking at the sound here, it makes up a little waveform display of the sound, and there's options on that as to where that goes, whether it actually goes next to your project or whether, if you're on a network drive, yeah, there's things like that which have been added in. So there's a lot of nice little things that make it better. Anyway, to get back to actually using the program, so I've got some clips in. You'll just double click on them, push it up in the source, you can have a look at it, pretty much like every program. You know, you can play the stuff, mark an in point with an I, out point with an O. You can drag along here and scrub through the footage. I've turned the sound off, just that's why you can't hear any sound, just as otherwise it would just get in the way. But yeah, you can do J, K and L. You can do all the stuff that you would expect to do in every other editing program. One thing that sometimes throws people is when they'll put an in point on and that happens, it goes in red. And the only thing that's happened there is the in point is after the out point, and that's why it went red. So if you ever see that, it's fine, you just do an in point, then do another out point, and it goes away again. But it is warning you, your in point shouldn't be after the out point, because I was listening to Radio 4 on the way in, and apparently time travel isn't possible yet, so you...
I listened to it the day before yesterday, and it was.
Yes, but that's tomorrow's news.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so you've got a clip there, then you then take that and shove it onto the timeline. Now you can either put it on a timeline where the audio and the video are together, or you can split it up, so let's put that on the dual mode so I can grab it easier, or you can grab it so that the audio and the video split up. If you just want to bring in the video, not the audio, then you just turn off the little A there and you can bring in just the picture. You can also do things like change it between mono and stereo. So at the moment this is a stereo clip. If I bring it in, it brings in the left and right audio together, but if I change that, it's going to bring them in and split the two of them up. So now I've got the left on one and the right on the other. Which means just a little bit of fiddling here. You know, I've got something here that says A1 and A2. So if I turn off A2, then when I drag a clip down, it's only going to bring in the A1 track, which is going to be on its own on a single track. So you get to know this sort of stuff. It's very easy to just throw stuff on the timeline, keep the tracks that you want, and put them where you want to. I'm dragging and dropping because I drag and drop an awful lot, but you've also got buttons to do this sort of thing. You can insert and overwrite on the timeline. And this kind of track patching is nice and easy to use. So, you know, I want to put that clip in there. I'll say, right, the video's going there, the audio's going there, click on a button and it puts the clip in. You've got an insert mode or an overwrite mode, so that means when you throw stuff on the timeline, it either wipes out what's there or it inserts stuff and moves it out of the way. The sort of stuff you'd expect in all editing programs. You've also got sync locks here per track. If older versions of EDIUS, you either, when you inserted something, it moved everything on every track, or it just moved the stuff on the track you were shoving the clip into. Well, now you can actually say, well, I want to move everything on that track, but I don't want to move stuff on that track, and I don't want to move stuff on that track. So you can turn them on and off per tracks.
Can you just turn the field view off so it's on frame view, stop it going through?
I'm going to turn that on in a minute.
Oh, right.
So basically, yeah, and at the moment I'm in a 50i project, so it's interlaced. So what Richard was saying is that when you pause something, obviously you've got a choice of whether you're just showing the upper field or the lower field in the entire frame. Well, again, pretty much like other stuff. You've got an overlay that you can put up which will show you your audio levels. So if I start playing that, you can see you've got left and right audio levels coming up there. The information above it, which is currently saying source information, is a setting which lets you decide, you know, whether you're going to play, whether you're going to show the time code of the clip, and that's got no, well, it's nothing at all. So if there's time code, it will just display the time code, or it will display the date and time it was actually recorded at. This actually has been very useful for a lot of people. We've got a lot of private detective places using EDIUS, because they need to actually film, you know, they'll be filming something which they need to use as evidence in court. They need to put the date and time on screen for the evidence, you know, so that when it comes up in court they can prove it was a certain time. And EDIUS is actually about the only program we've got that's doing that. Yeah, there are ways of getting time code up in other programs, but there seems to be no other way of getting the date and time coming up. Even though the date and time's there, it just doesn't pop up in lots of other programs. So for that, that's actually a reason why some people have bought EDIUS, purely because they can actually get the date and time to come up.
And you can put that on a Blu-ray or a DVD, which you can print off as well. Yeah,
a Blu-ray or a DVD or a file. So at the moment I'm showing source timecode there. That could also be the timecode of the timeline as opposed to the actual clip. The last thing I was doing, I just happened to want to actually put the source timecode out to something, but I'll just change it to sequence. Obviously you can change the place and fiddle around, but it's a nice thing that it does. I also like the audio displays that you've got coming up there. So if we did actually make something a bit too loud, let's just up the gain on that. Then it peaks up into the red. Yes, I've made that far too loud. It's a good job I've turned the sound off so you can't hear it. But yeah, that's peaked up into the red there, and it just warns you that your audio levels are a bit too loud. There are settings in there to say what level you actually want to warn as being an audio level. Having messed that up, I really want to change that so that the audio is back to normal. So what I did is I just right-clicked and went to Properties, and then here you've got a setting for the audio gain. This is just a very simple up the entire clip by a certain amount of levels. So I can come in there, I can type something else, or I can just use the normalize feature to say, well, let's just change the level so it peaks at -12, and that gets it back to a sensible level. I can actually do that on lots of clips at once, so if you actually want to do a quick normalize on everything, you can just select the whole lot and then it'll change the volume on all of them.
And that's peak rather than RMS.
It's just peak. It's just a very simple, you know, make it as loud as you can without the loudest bit peaking. It's also doing it per clip, so that one might have been changed by a different amount to that one. So it's the sort of thing which is useful, but you've got to be a bit careful when you use it. So, for example, I do tutorials, which is just me yakking away for ages, and then I cut out all the swearing and everything else, and the bits that go wrong. And if I do that, and there's hundreds of cuts in the timeline, each individual bit goes up and down by different amounts, so you notice the joins horribly. So it's the sort of thing you just have to be careful about using them. It's not, you were talking about dynamics and being able to level stuff out. It's not a proper dynamics filter. It's a very simple thing, but on the other hand I've used it quite a bit because it's a very quick way of upping the levels without having to faff around, and then I'll fiddle with it afterwards. As far as the timeline goes, we have, so say, video tracks, we have video and audio tracks, and we have audio tracks, and like I said, I put some clips up here and then the audio went down there if I wanted it to, or I can put them together. I quite like to use the video and the audio tracks together just because I think if you've got sound that's synced to the video, it's nice for them to stay together. You can add in as many as you like, so you can have, you know, actually there's no limit on this, it's not 99 like other programs, so I've probably done about 20 at most. But yeah, you can just say, oh, let's bung in some more video tracks or bung in some more audio tracks, and then you can spread your stuff out. Because I have done quite a bit of compositing inside of it, because it's got a lot of nice effects features on it. So yeah, in terms of the timeline, a lot of it you'll find is very similar to the other programs. You'll find if you're coming from here from Premiere or from Liquid, actually a lot of the keyboard shortcuts are the same. So it's I for in and O for out and J, K and L and that sort of thing. There are obviously some changes, but you know, a lot of it's the same as other programs. So that's sort of the general program itself. Specifically, there are things that EDIUS does that other programs don't do, or you need extra plugins to do, which are very nice. I mean, I particularly like using the source browser. It does actually, if you've got a DVD or if you've got a Blu-ray disc or an audio CD, if you pop that in there, it'll show you everything that's on it, and then you can rip it off that and reuse it. Now, I've had variable results with DVDs. CD's never been a problem. Variable results with DVDs, some of them, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Because actually being able to rip footage off a DVD and reuse it is something everybody wants to do. It's a feature request for all the programs. I always remember with Avid Liquid, it was added in version 6, and they took it out. I mean, they left it in there, but hid it if you like, in version 7, because they had too many tech support phone calls. Because it doesn't always work. There's so many different ways of making DVDs that sometimes, you know, it doesn't actually work. But when it does work, you know, this works as well as anything else. And you just pop it in, you see a list of titles, you grab it and check on the timeline. And it works for getting stuff off Blu-ray discs. I've been asked about this before. You know, if you want to actually make up a Blu-ray disc and then reuse the stuff, you can get it back with EDIUS. You'll find a lot of it's very similar to other programs. You've obviously got things like a rubber band under here, so I can put points on there and change the audio and the kind of stuff, the normal kind of stuff. What I like about it is I find it's just very slick and fast, and it just kind of does what you want it to. I use Premiere, I use Avid, I use Vegas, and I use all of them. I keep coming back to EDIUS because, okay, not perfect, because nothing's 100% perfect, but to be perfectly honest, if there's something I want to do, it probably just does it. You know, if I want to export something, it'll probably just export it. I won't have to faff around too much with getting the settings right. It doesn't always work, but it works, I think, better than everything else. There's silly little things like I want to shove a title in, so I'm just going to use the basic titling program that comes with it, and I'm going to put the title onto the title track. Now in there, you come in, you start typing a title, you click OK, and it's put the title in, and you can see down there it's actually put a title in. It defaults to 5 seconds, which is the default length, and it's put it in there with a cross dissolve at the start and the end. So if I want to put in a title, it's actually very, very quick. You can just also mark an in and out point, say shove in a quick title, come out of that, and then now I've got a title that matches the in and the out point. So it's what, 47 seconds, that's what I've actually set there, with a 1 second dissolve at the start and the end. Which is just nice and, you know, with other programs, Premiere, I make a title, it goes in the bin, you drag it from the bin, you put it on the timeline, you add a cross dissolve onto it. Yeah, not the end of the world. Cheers. But that's quicker. It's just there's lots of nice things like that in EDIUS which I particularly like. When it comes to the range of effects, there's an awful lot of nice effects inside of it, and particularly I was going to talk about the scaling. So, for example, I said it does better scaling when you're changing from high definition to standard definition. So I was just fiddling with a couple of these clips earlier. Actually, this one shows you up quite nicely. At the moment I'm in a high definition project. At the top I've got one clip which, if I go into this thing called the layouter, which is a way of scaling clips inside of EDIUS, you can see that's set to what's called average area. If I go into the bottom one, then that's actually set to Lanczos, which is the standard setting for the whole project. Now at the moment you probably can't see any difference between the two of them whatsoever. And that's because they are high definition clips in a high definition project, and they're not scaled at all, so nothing's happening, which is why they look exactly the same. Plus it would help if I was showing the entire frame, but yeah, you can't see any difference whatsoever there. If I swap that into standard definition, that one there is the one with the lower quality scaling. And in particular, if you look at the sort of lines right at the top there, these spokes up here, you can see it's a bit jaggy there. And if I turn it off, it gets just, particularly if you're noticeable if you start playing it. So let's just start playing it. Now that's the better quality scaling, and that's the regular sort of EDIUS scaling. Now if you're looking at it, particularly those diagonal lines it's showing. Now, you know, you might say, wow, that's not huge. And the answer is, yeah, it's not huge, but it is different, it is better. And it is noticeably better, but it's not like a major wow.
But it's also especially better after you've compressed it, say put it on a DVD, because then you're recompressing it, and there's more complex motion in the aliasing which is created through bad scaling. All that little squirreling noise is much harder for the MPEG-2 compressor to compress. So it's a big difference when you actually finally watch the DVD at home.
And overall it just does a better job, a bit sharper, a bit nicer. It's the best way we've got of going from high def to standard def. It's never going to make standard def look like high def. I mean, you wouldn't believe the number of people that have phoned us up complaining that they've got a high def camera and they've made a DVD out of it and it doesn't look the same. Yeah, it won't, because you've got less pixels. But it does the best job that I've got of anything out there. You know, I mean, there are other programs like TMPEG. Does anybody use TMPEG? Yeah, TMPEG does the same kind of scaling as EDIUS. So when EDIUS didn't do this, I'd have to export it to TMPEG and do it. But in the old days, I used to produce my tutorials on DVD, and I'd have to do a lot of work to try and get this kind of screen to look very good on a DVD. And I wish I had this, because it would make it look really good. Anyway, let's go back to high def. Then I just went back to the project settings there, and I changed between standard definition and high definition. Or I can just come in here, I can change any of these settings, so I can go back to standard def. I go to 4:3, so if I go into that, I'm now in a 4:3 project. Now automatically what's happening here, see the TVs aren't set up and aren't displaying it properly. We'd have to go to the aspect button on the TV and make it show it properly. But automatically what's happening there is it's taking that high def clip, and because it's widescreen, it's automatically letterboxing it and shoving it on screen. Of course there's a way of changing that, so you can come into the layouter for a particular clip, and I can say just make it fit, and I can save that as the default, so anytime I change from high def to standard def it always fits. Anyway, I'm going to go back to high def because just standard def is just so last century. Actually it was 2004 was when we got our first high def camera. So EDIUS, by the way, is very good at dealing with lots of different formats on the timeline. It pretty much takes anything. Their slogan is edit everything, which is just asking for trouble, because there's always going to be some format that it doesn't get on with. But it does pretty much deal with everything. If you've got anything that's filming in, say, Apple ProRes format, you know, some of our cameras actually film in that, it'll take that and shove it on the timeline. But it deals with pretty much every format that that I can throw at it. Apart from that, as I say, you have got half a ton of effects. So there's very, very good colour correction. I should have loaded up a clip that needs colour correction, shouldn't I?
Yeah, have you got any of your stuff instead of mine?
I thought you'd like me showing off. I thought you'd like me showing off your fancy Panasonic camera footage.
Yeah, this is all footage, the big wheel from the HPX 250. No thanks, Dave. Checks in the post.
Okay, I'll hold you to that.
Literally.
Yeah, the three-way colour corrector. If you've used it in EDIUS 6, this used to be called the white balance filter. It's exactly the same filter. It works in the same way as it does in EDIUS 7. So it's just been called the three-way colour corrector, because it is a three-way colour corrector. It's not a white balance filter. But mainly, what you see, you're looking at that shot there, which is a bit blue, and all you've really got to do is click on a grey bit, click on a black bit, and click on a white bit, and it generally sorts it out and gets a better balanced shot. You can do it before and after, so you can see it's very, very blue before, better after. Most of the time that sorts stuff out. Now these days, where everybody's into grading and so on, so I never stop at that. Because yeah, we were quite happy with that 10 years ago, but these days you've got to go completely mad and grade things to hell, so that's not where we stop. But most of the time, if you're in a hurry, you can just click, 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 and it does the job.
Actually, quite often I use the contrast beneath the grey, white and black as well for sort of subtle, what I used to use YUV curve for. You just play around and just see how it looks better.
Well, basically what that's done is it's just set these colour wheels. So, you know, it said this is the blacks, this is the midtones, this is the highlights. And it's just said, well, I needed a bit more yellow in there to get rid of the blue, and it's just set it for you. We can always fiddle with it and move it around. So if you don't like it, you can fiddle with the sliders. You can up the saturation, so you can put a bit more colour in the mid-tones. I quite like to take the colour out of my shadows a bit to make them a bit blacker rather than colourful. And like Richard says, you can fiddle a bit with the exposure there, so that's making the shadows darker.
Which you can squeeze a bit of noise out.
And that one there is, you know, making the mid-tones a bit lighter. Although I've got another filter I use quite a lot for that as well. This bit in the middle here is all to do with secondary colour correction, so if I was to click on that, then I could just choose to do just the blues or just the reds. And let's just see, what am I actually doing here? So that's showing me the stuff that I'm actually doing, which is probably far, far too much. But anyway, so you've got there, you know, now my colour correction is only affecting some bits of the image, you know, it's only affecting the bits that are white there. Big thing about this in this program as compared to the old EDIUS 6.5 and EDIUS 6 is this is now a 10-bit filter. In fact, pretty much all the filters are now 10-bit. Now I mentioned that thing about 10-bit processing giving you better results. In EDIUS 6 in particular, hardly any of the filters were 10-bit. So although you could set 10-bit in the project, as soon as you started doing something to it, it went into 8-bit, which meant you lost the advantage of it. Whereas pretty much everything, there's only two filters in this which aren't anymore, which is the chroma keyer and the chrominance filter, which we both like to be 10-bit because we use those quite a bit as well. But apart from that, everything else is now 10-bit, which basically means you get the proper advantage of using 10-bit settings in your project. This bit down there is for keyframing, so you can start it at one setting and go to something else. But yeah, I use that one a lot. I also use the YUV curve a lot, which is very, very good. For, let's take a bright, dark shot here. Where has it gone? Can't see what it's done. Yeah. I should be looking at this screen, it's easier to see. But this one here basically is a filter which lets you change the brightness levels of an image. So what you've got here is this is showing you dark bits to bright bits, in the middle is the mid-tones. So if you put a point on there, you can brighten up the mid-tones and crush the blacks and fiddle with the highlights. So I do use that one quite a lot for fiddling around that. I tend not to use these where you can fiddle with the colour as well. But I find it's a lot easier to fiddle with the exposure here, and then take a three-way colour corrector and shove that on there as well, and then fiddle with that. And now, because I've brightened up the mid-tones, the colour's gone, so I'll add in a bit of saturation on that. And then if I want to, I can get rid of the yellow look and start to make it white, or I can just click on it. So there's a lot you can do with it. It's a lot, very good filters. I find that actually with the colour correction in particular, I can do pretty much everything I want to do with the filters inside of EDIUS. I've started using Resolve a lot more, which we'll talk about later, which, you know, can do better, as you'd expect it to, but I found the EDIUS filters pretty much do what I want them pretty quickly. There's some very nice colour correction tutorials as well. There's a guy in Australia, he just put another one up the other day, but he's done some very nice colour correction tutorials using the chrominance filter a lot. He does things like take a shot with a bridge and then put a sunset behind it and completely change the shot. They're free and they're on the internet, so you know, he's just using all the filters inside of EDIUS. So.
Probably on the three-way colour correction, if there's any criticism I've got of it, it feels a little bit small. The movements that you get within those colour wheels are very minute, so if you just want to...
Yeah, I mean you can move them around on the numbers instead, and then if you hold down on the control key it'll go through on smaller amounts. But yeah, I mean, well, I tend to make them as big as I can. Yeah. But it's still... You're right, there's quite a large movement in there. So yeah, but the other way is to just use the numbers. Actually, I've been yakking already for nearly an hour. So there's other things obviously I could tell you about EDIUS. I mean, the other thing is it will export to Blu-ray disc and DVD straight off the timeline. The latest stuff they've added into it is that the fact it will do Blu-ray discs in MPEG-2 as well as in H.264. Everybody familiar with H.264? It's sort of a format that's used for just about everything these days. So it's how BBC HD is transmitted, it's how Blu-rays are made, it's how AVC HD is filmed. It's a very common video format where the video is compressed an awful lot, but you still get a very nice picture out of it. If you're going to upload something to YouTube, then you'll make an H.264 file and upload it to YouTube, or if you're going to make a Blu-ray disc. And it's quite time consuming because it's quite hard work. So on a regular system, if I was to do that with EDIUS and I had an hour to do, it would take 2 or 3 hours to knock it up. If I'm using a system that I had 3 years ago, it would take 4 or 5 hours to knock it up. But one of the big things about EDIUS that nothing else does, which I won't be able to show you because I don't have it plugged in properly, is there's a thing built into the Intel processors these days, or some of them, where it can use the hardware to do really fast H.264 encoding. So EDIUS uses that. It's a thing called Intel QuickSync. Now you need the screens plumbed in properly, and because the way I'm showing this off I haven't got them plumbed in properly, but if I've got that plugged in, it can do an hour in about 20 minutes, as opposed to 2 or 3 hours. And it's easily the fastest thing we've got for making up MP4 files, flash files, Blu-ray discs or anything else.
And what processors does that need?
It needs a Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge or Haswell processor.
So it's not an i7.
Well, just to be difficult, they're all i7s. But there's other i7s. So there's different types of i7s. So you've got what's called 2011 pin i7s. You've got the original i7s. They don't have it, whereas it's a Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge, or Haswell.
So I'm best to check with Ringo on that.
Yeah, we can have a look on your system. Yeah. Buy a new system, obviously. Is the best way to do it.
So we have to see that the Microsoft Essentials, the security side, was interfering with the Blu-ray burning side of it at one time. Has that been sorted?
That's been sorted out, yeah.
So it just goes straight in now?
Yeah. I mean, EDIUS does have a problem with quite a few antivirus programs. Yeah. The one we use is the Microsoft Security Essentials that we don't have a problem with. But yeah, there was a point where a version of it caused a problem.
Yeah.
So I don't seem to have any problems with AVG.
They have quite a few problems with different antivirus programs. If you go on any video forum, most people will say don't put an antivirus program on the computer, which is a stupid idea if you're having it on the internet. But you know, I find I use the Microsoft one, it's free and it works and it doesn't cause me a problem. But yeah, there was a point where it did. But right now, no, we don't have an issue with that at all. We've got laptops that can use the QuickSync, so my little laptop that's sitting over here, I can actually just do QuickSync encoding on that. In fact, all of our laptops can do QuickSync encoding, so you know, I can knock up a Blu-ray really fast on that as well. But it's one thing that this does that nothing else does. It does MP4 files and Blu-ray files basically quicker than everything else does.
Yeah, I've got a one niggle in regard to burned disk. I have experienced some crashes when making the menus. And so I like to keep saving, just in case. But the only way to save is to exit burn to disk and come back in, and it's so time consuming.
Yeah. No, there isn't an answer. No, you can't save the project when you're in the burnt to disk. No, I mean there isn't an answer. Again, I don't really get crashing on the burnt to disk. There are some things like the antivirus that you mentioned that sometimes crash it.
I'm not connected to the internet.
But yeah, I mean I don't really get problems with that either. The only time we've had problems is you know, things like corrupt clips on the timeline causing problems.
Yeah.
But, I've seen it on some complex menus set up. So come across that same thing.
I mean, the disk writing that's inside of EDIUS You know, it's simple, and you know, my favourite DVD and Blu-ray writing is Adobe Encore, which I was going to talk briefly about later on, and it does more stuff. You know, we sold a lot of copies of DVD Workshop, which is a very good DVD writing program. Doesn't exist anymore, does more than EDIUS does. I found that if I'm trying to do something complicated, I'd probably go for a different program. And it would either be Encore, which is going to cost you 700 quid, or there's a Sony one called DVD Architect.
Or your soul if you have to go on the cloud.
But yeah, I mean, I'm actually, there's a program called DVD Architect. Now, I wasn't going to be showing it off, but basically there's a Sony program, DVD Architect, I really like. You used to be able to only buy that with Vegas, now you can buy it on its own for about 150 quid. So if you're looking for something better, that's possibly an option.
How about the sound, the calm sound adjustment within this? You've now got the settings to make sure you're within the average loudness.
Oh, there's a loudness.
Yeah.
So I just pulled up the print to file thing there, where you can see all the different types of file that you can make up. One big change you've got with the new EDIUS is it can actually make up QuickTime HQ files. HQ is their own codec, which is, you know, when you're making up a file for somebody else to edit, what you want to do is to keep it as uncompressed or as simple as possible. And the problem, especially when you're going off to a Mac, is what are you actually going to give them that's not, you know, most QuickTime files, they'll probably mess up the colour balance, they'll mess up the brightness and all sorts of stuff. So now you can do HQ Canopus files, which you couldn't do with the old one, and so you can give those to people and they can download the codec for nothing and put it on there. But you can see you can do lots of other stuff, so there's a bunch of Grass Valley formats in here. There's also XD Cam. It's one of the few programs we've got that can write back to XD Cam
And
cards.
What about XD Cam cards?
Yeah. So I've got a regular customer of ours who's using Avid, and he likes Avid and he wanted to stick with Avid. He bought 2 copies of EDIUS because he can write his Avid edits back to an XD Cam card and put it back in his camera, and it was his simplest way to give the edit to somebody else.
And you can write back to an SD card in AVC HD format, so it will play back either on a Panasonic screen or in your AVC HD camcorder. So
excuse my ignorance, so how would you actually do that, to write that back onto a...
To write that to the card, you come in here and you'd use the XD Cam plugin.
Yeah.
That's the right one, isn't it? And then you say memory card or DVC or a particular folder. So you put the memory card in and then you click burn and it will go off and write it back to the card.
So I'll write it back to S-Time card.
Yeah.
So that would be...
Yeah. I mean, you write it to the SBS card or you put it onto a folder, but it's obviously better to put it on the card because it will write it in the right way. It makes the same kind of files up, but the formats of the card is slightly different. And like Richard said, it goes back to AVC HD as well. Doesn't work with all AVC HD cameras, of course. Nothing's ever that simple. In fact, I've got my Panasonic camera up there. It won't read cards I created in EDIUS, whereas my Panasonic Blu-ray player will. But but it still does it. Nothing, you know, most of us don't even attempt to do it. Premiere will write P2 cards, but it won't write XD Cam cards. Same with Avid, you know. And it's just it's another way of getting an edit out to people.
Sorry, we're actually going to have to dump stuff out in IMX35 for standard depth transmission.
Right.
Presumably it still does that, and by using the Lancos stuff it's going to get
better
better
quality. That's SD.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the best.
Much better quality.
I explained how to do that on the tutorial, the tutorial that I've got. So you know, we get you that. But yeah, basically, there's the IMX was in there somewhere. I did see it. Yeah, so what you have to do is change the project settings and then you just export it. But yes, it still does that. So you'll find pretty much everything that 6.5 did, this does. The one thing that's missing is there's no 2D picture-in-picture and no 3D picture-in-picture. So you asked about the loudness meter. Yeah, there's a loudness meter reader, effectively. So you shove that on there, then you just start it going and press the timeline, and it'll go through and analyse the timeline. You've got various different settings, or you can make your own up, but obviously it's got the typical settings. Now, if anybody's familiar with this, basically these days broadcasters are being given files rather than being sent tapes. And so they'll get a file, they'll run it through a program, and they'll come up and say, your levels are beyond standard levels, fix it. So what you want is something that tells you if your file is correct before you send it off to them. And that's what the loudness meter does. Now all it does is it goes through, you play the whole thing, it will measure it and produce a graph with a line there saying what the levels are, and then you have to go and fix it. It doesn't fix anything, it's not a dynamics filter or anything, it just measures it.
That's still real time.
Yeah.
Playing out that, yeah.
Yeah. That again, that's the same as it was in the old bit.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, when they've looked at that, think you know, it'll actually automatically level out stuff for me. It doesn't do anything to the footage, it just warns you of problems. So yeah, you pick the bit you want and then you play it, and let's stop it playing. And then it'll give you a graph and you can decide what you want to do about it. And then you can go back and test that bit again. And it's something I haven't actually had to do that because actually I don't give anything out to broadcast. But it is it's getting more and more important. It's getting something that is being put into all the different programs. So you know they've just put something into Audition that does the same sort of thing.
And really, just to throw that question I threw at you earlier on, see if anyone else, I guess, has got any input on that with those, what sort of limiters and compressors and things people might.
Yeah, basically you're asking about plugins. So with the old version of EDIUS, there used to be some dynamics plugins, some from iZotope, and some noise reduction plugins which don't work in this anymore. So you have to buy new ones because there's nothing. You know, you get a bunch of audio filters with it, which is, you know, pretty good graphic equalizer and stuff like that. But you don't get a noise reduction plugin. You don't get a dynamics plugin where you can say, right, level the volume out to this kind of level. So it takes VST plugins, and you have to buy 64-bit ones. There are some around. And what Andy was saying was, basically, has anybody got any that they would recommend? The iZotope ones are the ones that I would suggest looking at. We actually don't sell them, but the iZotope ones, which are a couple of £100, are actually very good, and I've seen a lot of people recommend them. But has anybody got any others?
Waves. Is that VST?
Yeah. I don't know if they'll work in this, but certainly.
You need a 64-bit one. I've seen.
Yeah, they are good.
Okay.
But yeah, the idea is, you know, that's a filter where you shove it on there and it levels it out. So I try and do that on my tutorials, to be honest, you know, because I go up and down and people have always complained the levels are all over the place. So I'm trying to do that better these days, and I do put a dynamics filter on there and try and even it out. But to be honest, I go into Audition to do that because I have it.
Well, no, something you said. Did you say something you don't use, Macari? You tend to use.
I tend to use the image stabilizer in this. So yeah, I've got to get on to the next thing in a sec. But yeah, I'll just quickly tell you that there's an image stabilizer inside of this, and or stabilize. That would have been a good shot. And I've actually set this up by accident to automatically copy everything into the project, and that's just annoying. So basically, that thing I was saying about bringing in clips off a card, it will actually copy stuff for you. It'll also do it for a project, which means that actually it's very useful because, you know, I was doing a presentation for a show, and I started, oh, I know I've got some footage on that camera, that computer on the network over there, and that computer over there, and some still images. I was dragging in stuff from all over the place. Now the worst thing about that is that then you forget to copy that particular file onto your laptop, and then when you get to the show you've got a big hole in the timeline. Well, there's a really lovely thing when you import stuff here where you can just click transfer to project, and then it'll copy everything that you load up into it into the project folder. So all you have to do then is take that project folder away, and you know everything for that project's in that folder. And I find that extremely useful. I left it ticked, which is why it was actually doing it for everything, which I don't really need to do. But it is something which I find incredibly useful because it just means I can pull in footage from everywhere, and I know everything ends up in the project folder. And how many times have you done an edit and then put it on another machine and there's something missing? You know, I mean, it's. So anyway, I've got a clip there which is a bit wobbly. And I'm going to grab hold of a video filter which is called the image stabilizer, which is a new one that's in EDIUS.
And this is on 6.5 as well.
It's in 6.5 and in 7, yeah. Now the really nice thing about this compared to Macari is it does all the analysing in the background, because if you're going to stabilise an image, what happens is it's got to look at it, and then every time you jerk the camera to the right, it's got to jerk it to the left. And then it's got to zoom in to get rid of any borders that are created. One of the weddings I was doing the photographs outside, and it was all handheld, and I thought I'd just like to smooth that out a bit. So I throw Macari onto it, then I had to go into each individual effect, get it to analyse it, look at the results, fiddle with the sliders, and then get you know, it took time. It took every clip I had to wait for it to analyse. Really nice thing about this is it analyses in the background.
So does it retain that analysis, David? So one of the annoying things with Macari is if you
also the transition or something,
then
you have to
just alter the
redo
length of the clip by by 2 frames. It's got to go through that pantomime again.
If you were to make this clip bigger, then it's going to have to do more analysis. If I make it smaller, then no, it doesn't.
Right.
But the nice thing that I find about it is basically that I can shove it onto a bunch of clips, throw it onto 15 or 20 clips, and then just let it get on with it, and then do something else while it's doing the analysis, and then come back and have a look at it.
The only thing I find with that though, it does drop the quality.
Well, it will do because
It drops it a lot.
it's zooming in, but you can dictate, you can choose how much it zooms in, but the more you zoom in, the more quality it will lose, and the less stabilisation it can do.
Losing, like 10%. That's quite a bit.
It's just digital scaling.
Yeah, is there nothing, anything better than that? Is that?
No, this does.
Tripod.
Yeah.
That's easy to say. If you're in a position where you can't use a tripod.
No, this
4K.
To be honest,
But
this
it's the problem. It's
Go to 4K and do it from there.
That's true.
this does it. I mean, I go into the project settings and I set the scaling to Lanczos, then it does a better job then. But it does the best job of any of the ones that I've got out
And you
there.
can see it distorts it slightly as well.
And if you look at this one, this is an HDV footage that was filmed on a single chip camera, so it's not the best footage in the world. Now if I start that playing, you know, there's something slightly odd happening in the round areas there, which happens on every single image stabilizer I put this through. But if I happen to just put a before and after on, you can suddenly see how much it was moving around and how much is moving around now. So it was quick. It must have taken 30 seconds to do it. I don't know, I was busy talking at the time. I just threw it on there and then it stabilised it for me. Really nice thing about it as well, let's just get out of that one, is this stuff, which is some standard definition. Standard definition clips, shove it onto the timeline. I'm just going to stick the same filter on that as well. Now it's got to analyse that, but that's a standard definition clip on a high definition timeline being stabilised. And again, it's just gone ahead and done that, and then the clip's been stabilised. Now obviously, scaling that from standard def to high definition, you know, it's not going to look at all like high definition. But on the other hand, it just did it quickly. You know, you do before and after, you can see how much it was wobbling around beforehand. And the nice thing is, you know, I just threw the clip on the timeline and put the effect on it. Now Premiere has got an image stabilizer in it these days. It's actually a very good image stabilizer. It takes about 10 times longer to analyse it, and the clip has to match the timeline. So if you put that standard def clip on a high def timeline in Premiere, you've then got to start off a standard def timeline, put the standard def clip on it, analyse it, put it into the timeline. Here, throw it on, job done, you know. So I say, the program isn't perfect, but I think it's really good, reliable, does pretty much whatever I wanted to do, and does it fast. And I haven't touched on half the things that it can do. It can do things like moving masks. So I talked about doing compositing inside the program. You know, I'm doing a science fiction-y thing at the moment, and for that I need to do some cutting out of people and putting effects on it. I was just doing some stuff the other day. I was going to do some of it in After Effects. I just ended up doing it in EDIUS, because it worked in EDIUS. There wasn't anything After Effects was doing for this shot that EDIUS didn't do. So I ended up using EDIUS to do it, and I just stacked several clips up, merged them together, drew some masks on it, all done inside of EDIUS without having to go anywhere else. So here's my favourite editing program, all the others I've got. I've always been a big Premiere fan. I actually quite like Avid as well, even like Vegas sometimes. You know, but this still is the one I keep coming back to, and is my favourite. In terms of money, it's also the cheapest.
David, you mentioned something about at the beginning. You mentioned about the cards.
Yeah. So basically, the price side of things, EDIUS itself is normally about 500 quid, but there's a cross-grade promotion. So if you have any other decent editing program, so it doesn't include Pinnacle Studio and cheaper 50 quid programs, but anything like Premiere or Liquid or anything like that, you can get EDIUS for 240 quid plus VAT. If you've got EDIUS 6, then an upgrade's £189 plus VAT. Those are our prices, not the RRP, which is a bit more. And we even have them on the shelf if you want them. Obviously, we have a... Sorry.
And EDIUS 6.5 to 7?
6.5 to 7 is £189. If you've got any earlier version of EDIUS or any of the other programs, then like I said, it's £239 to upgrade. Works under Windows 7 or Windows 8. Doesn't work under XP or anything else. On the hardware side, I always like to have a piece of hardware to pop a picture out to a TV because you can see it properly. With older versions of EDIUS, you could only use Grass Valley cards, which are very nice. They work really well. These days, it actually works with lots of other people's cards. So the first people's cards it worked with Blackmagic. In EDIUS 6.5, it would let you capture through Blackmagic but not output. In EDIUS 7, it lets you capture and output. So frankly, we hardly sell Grass Valley cards anymore because the Blackmagic one's cheaper. They have simple things like this, which is a shuttle. This is a intensity shuttle, which is about £130. There's one that goes inside a computer, or this one which is an external one. This has got composite, component, S-video and HDMI in and out. So it does nearly everything that you want to do. It does everything up to full high definition. There's a simpler one which is called a mini monitor, which just does HDMI or SDI out. If that's all you need, that's only 100 quid. So a lot cheaper just to put an output on your system. They go all the way up to this one, which is the Ultra Studio 4K, which, as you might suspect, actually does 4K. So if I had got my 4K screen and I had some 4K footage, I'd be pumping it out to it right now. This one is connected via Thunderbolt, which is a fancy way of connecting up computers. There's an internal one as well, or use this one. This one would plug into one of our laptops, which has also got Thunderbolt on it. So we can actually do 4K off a laptop if we really want to. This comes in about 600 quid. So a box which has basically got SDI, HDMI, just about everything you possibly want on it.
XLR audio, absolutely every in and out.
It's all on the back. I would pull it up, but it's plumbed in. Is external. You can see it's rack mountable, which is why it's got the things on the front. That kind of box, about 600 quid.
And that's a Thunderbolt connection.
That's a Thunderbolt one. Although if you want a PCIe one, there's one you can shove inside a computer. They've got a new one coming out, which is Thunderbolt 2 soon as well. So we've got Thunderbolt actually on. We've got them on desktops and laptops now, if you need it. Thunderbolt's not as important on a PC as it is on a Mac, because on a Mac there's no way of stuffing stuff inside a Mac anymore, so you have to hang everything off the edge. Whereas on a PC, of course, you can open it up and just shove a card inside of it. But for a laptop, it's brilliant. I can do 4K off a laptop with a decent capture card, and it's about £600. And there's a whole variety of different cards from Blackmagic that will work. Well, all of the Blackmagic cards work with EDIUS. And they sort of start off at 100 quid, go up to about 700 quid. At the moment it works with some Matrox cards, but if you've got a Premiere system and you're using Matrox, it will work with all of them pretty soon.
MX02.
Yeah.
Mini.
Mini. It's going to work with all the MX02s very soon. It's going to work with all the Archer cards very soon as well. So yeah, if you're thinking of swapping to this from Premiere, if you've got an MX02, you don't need to buy new hardware. You just need to get hold of an EDIUS and obviously wait for it to actually work. We don't have a date for that yet. But I was told end of this year-ish. So I'm thinking any minute now.
So the MX02 Mini with Max, that will still be...
That'll work, just the Max bit won't do anything.
You won't be able to use the Max.
Yeah, the Max bit won't work inside of EDIUS, but you'll be able to use it for capturing and playback. And part of the idea of that is to get EDIUS out to as many people as possible and not force you to buy more hardware. And to make it work with things which do 4K, which they didn't have any gizmos that did that. So basically EDIUS 7, the biggest thing about it, 64-bit, working with lots more hardware, so it's cheaper to get into, and so there's a cross-grade. We're getting a lot of people moving over to EDIUS now. We sold an awful lot of Premiere systems, and I was going to talk about Premiere later on, but Premiere, Adobe have gone over to rental. You can't buy it outright anymore, you have to rent it. And if you don't like that idea, which a lot of our customers don't, and you're looking for an alternative, that's why a lot of people have been moving over to EDIUS. There's some things it does that Premiere doesn't do. It does pretty much everything else that Premiere does. It's going to cost you 240 quid, and you pay that once and you don't have to pay them again. So there's a lot of reasons why people are actually moving over to it.
You can do multi-camera, you haven't mentioned that, but it is.
Yeah. So I was there's so much. I could take the rest of the day about this. To be honest. But yeah, basically you've got multi-camera in it. You've got decent, really nice slow motion, keyframeable slow motion, obviously audio mixing. I mean, there's just tons and tons of stuff you can do with it. Pretty much everything that you could do in Liquid, you could do inside of this.
Except picture-in-picture.
Yeah, you can do picture-in-picture.
You can.
Well, you can, because when you said the
2 and 3D picture
doesn't have.
Oh, no.
They've taken there used to be a very simple picture-in-picture filter in it, but now
you don't need it.
They've replaced it with a better one.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So basically you go to this thing called the layouter, where you can just scale stuff and move it around, and then you can keyframe it.
Yeah, that's 6.5, isn't it?
Yeah. This has been in EDIUS since version 6. And it's just they had some older ones. With the older versions, they had a couple of things called a 2D picture-in-picture and a 3D picture-in-picture. And they weren't, the 2D picture-in-picture wasn't that logical when it came to keyframing. And also, if you did a still image inside of it and you tried to do a move on a still image, it would drop the quality of the still image to the timeline, so it would automatically look fuzzy and horrible. Whereas this keeps the quality of the image up all the time. So this has replaced it, that's why they got rid of the old ones.
I thought you meant it when you said that.
No, this is much better than the old stuff. It does 2D, it does 3D. The new stuff that you've got in it with the current version is it does drop shadows and soft borders and that sort of thing. Thoroughly keyframeable in a very sensible way, with a timeline where you can see keyframes and pick them up and move them around, and you can open it up and shove it into graph mode and and yeah, do Bezier handled keyframing if you want to.
How about still images? Any recommendations on maximum size? And type from a
It actually
DSLR?
handles raw images now.
It does. Ah,
I've certainly put 18 megapixel stills into it.
Really?
Yeah.
that's very interesting.
But yeah, in terms of well, still images, yeah, probably about 4,000-ish pixels still
Yeah.
across. It still does some of that through QuickTime, so it's just a slight limiting factor.
Interesting.
There's also a trial as well, so if you want to try it out, you can download the trial, try it out. If you're happy with it, you can convert the trial to a full version just by shoving in the serial number.